From the inception of the wireless system, I saw that this new art of applied electricity would be of greater benefit to the human race than any other scientific discovery, for it virtually eliminates distance. The majority of the ills from which humanity suffers are due to the immense extent of the terrestrial globe, and the inability of individuals and nations to come into close contact. Wireless will achieve the closer contact through transmission of intelligence, transport of our bodies, and materials and conveyance of energy. When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole Earth will be converted into a huge brain, which in fact it is. All things being particles of a real and rhythmic whole, we shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. Not only this, but through television and telephony, we shall see and hear one another as perfectly as though we were face to face, despite intervening distances of thousands of miles, and the instruments through which we shall be able to do this will be amazing compared with our present telephone. A man will be able to carry one in his
We have constructed a beautiful and majestic edifice of science. Its fine-laced linguistic constructions soar high into the sky. But direct your gaze to space between the pillars, arches, and floors. Beyond them, off into the void. Look more carefully, and there in the distance, in the black depth, you will find someone's green eyes staring. It is the secret, looking at you. That's a pretty interesting little quote there, isn't it? It's an excerpt from a book called The Phenomenon of Science by Valentin Turchin. And I came across it because it's quoted in the dedication of a book by Ben Goertzel, who I was just talking about last week. And as soon as I finished putting that together, I kept digging and was still looking into him, and the more I dug, the more fascinated I became, realizing just, as I learned more about his whole sort of life path and road to coming where he is today, where he's building the AI for the Sophia robots at Hanson Robotics. But back in 2010, Ben Goertzel wrote a book called The Cosmist Manifesto. And it was in that book that he wrote where he was dedicating it to basically a mentor, this Valentin Turchin, who was a Soviet-American scientist and futurist visionary who died in that year. But apparently he was friends with Goertzel, and Turchin was, in Ben's own words, a cybernetician and computer scientist. His contributions were numerous, including the Refal programming language, the theory of metasystem transitions, and the notion of a supercompilation. He was a pioneer of artificial intelligence and one of the visionaries at the basis of the global brain idea. And his book, The Phenomenon of Science, written in the 60s, is one of the most elegant statements of cosmic scientific philosophy ever written. And I was privileged to know Val in the late 90s and early 2000s when we both lived in New Jersey, in the context of collaborating with him on the commercialization of his supercompilation technology. Our discussions on supercompilation, immortality, AI, the philosophy of mathematics, and other topics were among the most memorable I've had with anyone. The death of great minds like Val is one of the absurd horrors that cosmist philosophy hopes to abolish via scientific and technological advance. So, some of you might remember that back in April of last year, I put together a video I think I called it Upload to the Heavens, where I was basically just sharing my recent discovery of this philosophical movement in Russia called Cosmism, which starts with figures such as Fedorov and Tsiolkovsky. And it's pretty interesting because there's a little bit more available online on YouTube and elsewhere on Cosmism now than there was less than a year ago, but there's still not a lot. But I'm just kind of amazed that I didn't come across Goertzel's affiliation with Cosmism at the time, or maybe I did. And I've kind of known about Ben Goertzel for a while now, with looking into Sophia and Hanson Robotics and all that. But it wasn't until last week that I really realized how involved with transhumanism, on a philosophical level, that he has been for such a long time before getting involved with Hanson Robotics. Obviously, he's a true believer in my mind, in terms of the metaphysical aspects and the transhumanist sort of dream. And I was kind of blown away when I realized that he just flat out, I presumably through his was introduced. I would guess that he was introduced to Cosmism through his friendship with this Valentin. I keep forgetting his last name. Turchin, he was a former Soviet American. So obviously, this guy was very influential on his views on all these things. But pretty amazing. And yeah, definitely when I first encountered Cosmism, I was blown away because of how it just very blatantly linked this whole idea of wanting to explore space, explore the cosmos, colonize the solar system and all this, with sort of a transcendental mysticism, because that's where it started, was, before anyone was even seriously trying to launch rockets or anything. It was a philosophy, and a mystical philosophy, started by Fedorov, and then continued on by who was basically a student of his, with Tsiolkovsky. Tsiolkovsky is an interesting guy too, and in the last, I don't know, month or two, a friend of mine came across this interview with George Young, who is an American scholar who's sort of an expert on Soviet, philosophical movements and writings that I think not even a lot of Russian people are not terribly familiar with, but he knows all about. But this guy, he does this interview with this young Russian guy, and they're talking about Cosmism as a philosophy and a movement. And at one point, he actually talks about how Tsiolkovsky, who's basically considered the father of the Russian space program, the guy who basically single-handedly managed to come up with the formulas for the rocket propulsion formulas for basically supposedly they used decades later, just in his own apartment, and had a little workshop with like wooden models of rockets. But it's one of those amazing, like, oh, he was such a genius, right? But turns out Tsiolkovsky was actually heavily into theosophy. Surprise, surprise. So even on the Russian front, it's like, no matter, most people know about Jack Parsons and his occult connections to Crowley, and then of course you have the Nazis and all of their occult roots and their development of the V2. But even on the Russian end, it's like time and time again, it always traces back to the occult, right?
But anyway, Tsiolkovsky did go back to Kaluga and teach. He was a science teacher in a school there, and in his spare time started doing these formulas for artificial satellites and things. So it's just remarkable
And
what
we
he
should
was
say
able
that
to.
not only he started doing that, he did accomplish that. Was he the first one to actually successfully calculate the necessary equations
He
for?
was. He was. His calculations were the first, and they were. Of course, other people built on them, but these were the first ones. Yes.
So he's generally regarded as sort of the either father or grandfather of the Soviet space program.
Well, the
And this
space
is all
program,
happening
sure.
in his apartment or something. He doesn't have a proper lab or anything.
No, it's just kind of in a shed near his house that he built, and using wooden models that he crafted himself. So yes, he didn't have a proper lab or anything like that. It was all just things that he devised out of out of the wood that was at hand. And this is part of Fyodor's idea too, that you work with what you have, with simple things, that you don't need big equipment or laboratories or anything.
And then Tsiolkovsky also had, I don't know if we should, I guess spiritual would be the term to describe that. He had a dimension to his thought. He would consider himself a panpsychist, and
yes,
had the notion of something he called atom spirit, right? Can you talk about that? What is atom spirit?
The idea that there is a spirit, there is life and spiritual life, maybe even a soul inside every particle, every monad in the universe, so that life extends throughout the universe already, and that life is teeming in the universe, and some of it is at a low level, at a primitive level. Others is much more advanced than we are in Tsiolkovsky's view. So life through the whole universe is alive, is part of his idea, and so the idea also is that that as we develop, it will be kind of like a universal Darwinism. That is, that the fitter will survive and others will fall by the wayside. That is kind of a troubling idea that runs counter to Fyodor's idea that resurrection will be for everybody, and we can't stop until everybody is in. Tsiolkovsky was much more selective in that way, that the geniuses would prevail, engineers and scientists and geniuses will prevail, and others will kind of fall by the wayside. But for Tsiolkovsky, it's a different story. An interesting person, but at the same time, with his scientific genius, a lot of his ideas sound a little bit strange and silly at times. He was very much interested in the movement of theosophy with Madame Blavatsky, and wrote a lot of pamphlets that sort of fit into her scheme of things, her ideas of the theosophical worldview, with all of its kind of strange features as well.
So here once again, you see Cosmism being the underlying philosophical sort of impetus that seems to have played a very significant role in the mindset of somebody like Goertzel, who I know, like when you listen to that last interview, it's really easy for a lot of people to write him off as just kind of some stoned out, guy with, I know he just kind of talks like he's kind of half awake or whatever, but do not underestimate this dude in terms of how much he has pondered and explored and thought about sort of the philosophical ramifications of what he's participating in. And that's kind of the scariest part of it, because this is not just some guy who's not really thinking about the spiritual implications or the metaphysical implications. He clearly is. But anyways, Goertzel has apparently actually written a number of books in the last however many years on topics such as the structure of intelligence, the involving mind, chaotic logic, from complexity to creativity, Linus Pauling, A Life in Science and Politics, Creating Internet Intelligence, The Path to Post-Humanity, The Hidden Pattern, Probabilistic Logic Networks, Echoes of the Great Farewell, Edge of the Bleeding Abyss, and the edited volumes Mind in Time, Artificial General Intelligence, Advances in Artificial General Intelligence, Artificial General Intelligence 2008. So, this is a big thing with Goertzel, is instead of just AI, the term AI or artificial intelligence, he talks a lot about artificial general intelligence, which is a more specific description of kind of what they're trying to build. because in reality, we already have artificial intelligence in the most generic sense, in the way that programs can be used to do very specific things better than humans. I mean, we all use it every day, even on your phone when you have autocorrect, or auto suggestion, which are algorithms which basically just keep track of the more you text or type into your computer, and it keeps track of the percentages of once you type this and then the next word, the likelihood of being this word. That's a type of artificial intelligence. Right, but it's not really having a conversation with you or thinking independently. So what they're trying to do is build human-like artificial intelligence, general intelligence that can sort of adapt and absorb things without specific parameters in just a more generic way, in a way like a baby's mind. And that's really what is behind the project that he was talking about in that video that I put up last week, where he's talking about his launch of Singularity.net and the use of blockchain technology to basically create this whole little cloud economy of AIs, where AIs are going to bid for jobs in the human world, right? So each different AIs that are more specifically suited towards specific projects, by using this blockchain sort of network of all these AIs working together that can collaborate and communicate with each other. I mean, it's crazy. But I kind of see why they're taking that approach, in terms of, rather than trying to create, because now we've created all these different programs that can do very specific things very well, whether it's like reading or interpreting human-made things, or pictures, or translating, or you name it. But there's no one program that can do everything perfectly. But if they can kind of contract with the other, or subcontract out work, it's crazy, but this actually seems like a rather viable way of getting AI to work like a big brain, where there's different sort of parts, different nodes that are capable of doing different things, and sort of letting the marketplace dictate which ones do better and for cheaper and more efficient. And yeah, it's crazy what they're talking about with this Singularity.net. It really could it really theoretically could burst into like a big Skynet type of thing, to where it's not just one AI, but it's like a society of AIs. But talk about another crazy confirmation of this whole idea of, the occult roots of scientism, right? And literally and how beliefs matter. To me, this kind of touches back to the whole ongoing debate over, why do we talk about cosmology? Why do we talk about all these abstract things? And why do people act like they're so important? And again, and this is something I've talked about in numerous videos, the link between transhumanism and the whole agenda of space travel, space exploration, is inseparable. And indeed, when you listen to Goertzel a lot, he throws in stuff about space and aliens. And in listen to this one little talk he gave back in 2010, and the audio is terrible, but I was really fascinated by he covered so many things that I've talked about in various random videos, whether it's panpsychism, or the idea of aliens having evolved to, basically becoming indistinguishable from the laws of physics themselves, or he even talks about the machine elves, which is sort of a DMT reference, the machine elves. Terrence McKenna's always talking about the machine elves. And just so much more. I can't even remember all the stuff, but it's just like like on down the line of like practically everything I've touched upon in various fringy videos, that he's all into it, man. And speaking of which, this is crazy too. I came across in 2010, he wrote this proposal. He had this program for, like, one of his approaches, one of the architectures that he was proposing to try and achieve artificial intelligence, or AGI, I suppose, more specifically. He actually named it Golem. And here's the thing: Golem's supposed to stand for goal-oriented learning meta-architecture. So it's like, even as an acronym, it doesn't even work. But he just apparently really wanted to use the word golem, so he forced it. And yeah, that was apparently, now he's not like Sophia. From what I can understand, it's not built using the golem architecture, but it's a slightly different one. So I don't think he's abandoned this altogether, but just the fact that he picked that name is like astounding. If you know anything about what the golem is, or, I know Gon's talked about it in Age of Deceit 2, Alchemy and the Rise of the Beast Image.
It should be clear by now that the modern technological and scientific agenda is built upon the same spiritual philosophies as ancient alchemy. The desire for man to create artificial life and as a result play God is nothing new. One of the goals for the alchemists was to create what is known as the golem, an animated anthropomorphic being created purely out of inanimate matter through magical workings. The Hebrew word golem is used once in the Bible and is found in Psalms 139:16, translated as unformed substance. Quote, "Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." According to Talmudic legends, Adam was initially created by God as a golem, or as a body without a soul, for the first 12 hours of his existence. The substance that gave his mindless body a soul was the breath of God. It was at this point that man became the image bearers of God. Quote, "Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living soul." While it is appropriate for God himself to create life out of non-life, it is easy to see that man attempting to do the same is in essence playing out the lie that was promised to us before the fall of mankind. The methods to form a golem were vast and complex, involving everything from meditative techniques, numerological markings, and ritual chanting. There are many Jewish traditions of holy rabbis and sages creating a golem. For example, when Eliezer of Worms, a 12th century Talmudist and mystic, commented on the Sefer Yezerah, or what is known as the Book of Formation, one of the earliest Kabbalistic writings, he gave a detailed and complex report of how to form a golem through advanced spiritual meditative techniques called the 221 gates. But perhaps the most famous golem is the one allegedly created by Rabbi Yehuda Levi ben Betzalel of Prague, known as the Maharal, in the 16th century. The legend goes that the Maharal created a golem named Goertzel to help save the Jews of Prague from the blood libel, an early form of anti-Semitism where cults derived from Roman Catholicism falsely accused the Jews for kidnapping and murdering children to use their blood in religious rituals. After fulfilling his purpose, the golem Goertzel was deanimated by the Maharal. It is widely believed that Goertzel's body was stored and still lays in the attic of Prague's Old New Synagogue, a building that was curiously not destroyed by the Nazis in World War II. In fact, it is believed that the Gestapo didn't even enter the attic when they took hold of the synagogue. This is no surprise, since it is well known that Hitler spoke often of the Übermensch to describe the National Socialist agenda of creating a biological superior Aryan race that would rule the earth for 1,000 years. In alchemy, it was the 16th century alchemist and occultist named Paracelsus who described how to create the golem, referred to as the homunculus in alchemical terms. In the Hermetic and Alchemical writings of Paracelsus, he said, quote, "But neither must we by any means forget the generation of homunculi, for there is some truth in this thing, although for a long time it was held in a most occult manner and with secrecy, while there was no little doubt and question among some of the old philosophers whether it was possible to nature and art that a man should be begotten without the female body and the natural womb. In order to accomplish it, you must proceed thus. Let the semen of a man putrefy by itself in a sealed cucurbite with the highest putrefaction, until it begins to live, move, and be agitated, which can easily be seen. If now, after this, it be every day nourished and fed cautiously and prudently with the arcanum of human blood, and kept for 40 weeks in the perpetual and equal heat, it becomes, thenceforth, a true and living infant, having all the members of a child that is born from a woman, but much smaller. This we call a homunculus, and it should be afterwards educated with the greatest care and zeal until it grows up and begins to display intelligence. Now this is one of the greatest secrets which God has revealed to mortal and fallible man. It is a miracle and marvel of God, an arcanum above arcana, and deserves to be kept secret until the last times, when there shall be nothing hidden, but all things shall be made manifest. In more recent times, it was the pioneer rocket fuel scientist and occultist Jack Parsons and the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, who performed magical ceremonies and rituals called Babylon working, carrying on the work done by occultist Aleister Crowley, who called himself the Great Beast 666. Parsons and Hubbard claimed to make contact with the spiritual realm to unleash an entity of a divine female named Babylon. But perhaps the most interesting part of all the rituals performed by Parsons and Hubbard was that of what is called the mannequin. The account of the mannequin begins with a huge steel container codenamed Jumbo that accompanied the first atomic bomb explosion on the Trinity site in New Mexico on July 16, 1945. The Brookings Institute released a short explanation of Jumbo in February of 2013, which stated, quote, "As preparations for the first nuclear weapons test, General Leslie Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, began to worry about what would happen if the test was a failure. With a very limited supply of plutonium then available, a failure could scatter tens of millions of dollars of the precious element across the New Mexico desert. To avoid this problem, a massive steel vessel to contain the explosion was built at a cost of $142 million. Nicknamed Jumbo, the container weighed 214 tons, was 25 feet long, 12 feet wide, and had walls 14 inches thick. According to occult investigators and conspiracy theorists James Shelby Downard and William N. Grimstead, Jumbo contained within it what Aleister Crowley had called the mannequin, an inanimate body which was inundated with nuclear energy, thus producing a real homunculus, or golem. Regardless of whether or not the stories of these occult practices to produce soulless life forms are true or not, it doesn't make much difference with what we are facing on the horizon. What we will come to discover is that Satan's grand agenda is to produce his own golem or homunculi out of the human race, so that we might abandon the image of God in exchange for the image of the beast.
It's crazy how much of the stuff he talked about in that is just coming to fruition more and more every day. But yeah, crazy stuff. So I've been pretty intrigued by this Ben Goertzel character. I spent a lot of my time over the holiday weekend just listening to him, familiarizing myself with what he's all about. And him and the other guy I've been listening to more is Quinn Michaels, who I think I'm going to have to do a separate video talking about him and all the weirdness that he's into, because I think it's something that is going to be talked about more and more. I know people have very strong opinions about him as a guy, and then Jason Goodman, who's been doing the interviews with him. So I'm really not trying. For me, it's more about the narrative that's being put forth through him, rather than whether he's making it up or lying or whatever. Because to me, that's not even really the point. The same thing with Goertzel. If you think he's whatever, I think he's a. These are interesting, these are fascinating little sort of character study type things with these guys. Very different, but if you are not familiar with Cosmism, I will put the link to the video I did on that. And then I will also include some snippets from various presentations that Goertzel has done if you want to understand what is the mentality and the philosophy that is pushing so many people towards actually wanting to build AI, to embrace AI, thinking that it's really going to solve all the problems. And why does it connect to, how does the building of an artificial intelligence connect to this whole desire to evolve as humans, evolve out of these skin bags, as they call them, evolve out of bodies altogether into some sort of higher state of existence, pure consciousness or whatever, because it's all interrelated, absolutely.
Часть из них — это письма к нему, и это материалы для книги «Философия общего дела».
The common task. That was what he called the search for eternal life through science. I can't, gosh, I can't read it. But I think I can read that. About universal Voskresenia, that's resurrection. Too hard for me. My friend Teresa did rather better.
This line, which separates the two parts of the drawing, seems to say the transition from blindness and lack of ability to be in charge of your own destiny to self-direction, self-regulation, and self-government. And when you cross that line, then you're in the ideal world where you have the resurrection of everybody, the unification of worlds.
The self-resurrection of man. Wow. That opening clip there was featuring some of the writings of a man named Nikolai Fyodorov, a man who's considered the founder of a philosophical, mystical movement known as Russian Cosmism. Now, I'm actually pretty excited to share this information with everyone because if you're really at all interested in the kinds of things that I've been putting together in all these videos, and especially sort of the common theme that runs through a lot of them in terms of how all this stuff fits into Bible prophecy and looking at it through a biblical and eschatological lens, and the Luciferian agenda and everything like that, then I would think you would find this as fascinating as I do, because this is pretty incredible, because I found it pretty incredible. I came across this whole topic of Russian Cosmism when I was doing research for the video I did on the prophets of sci-fi, and when I was basically looking for, when I was doing research into the early pioneers of exploring the ideas of space travel, and whether through science fiction or through actual scientific research, with guys like Jules Verne and all that. So in the course of that research, I came across a man named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, and Tsiolkovsky is a Russian who came up with the rocket propulsion equation. And so Tsiolkovsky himself was sort of a pioneer who then influenced preceding generations, such as Goddard, the American rocket scientist Goddard in the 20s and 30s, and a guy in Germany. And so Tsiolkovsky was really trying to figure out how to make rockets and figure out ways to go to other planets, many years before von Braun and the V2 and all that. But Tsiolkovsky was a cosmist. He was basically mentored by Fyodorov for 3 years. And so this whole topic of Russian cosmism and modern cosmism is just amazing, and how it is just a perfect vehicle to look at this whole same thread of how Big Bang cosmology, the whole why question, the question as to why the powers that be, or ultimately why Satan would go to all this effort into faking an entire cosmological system, faking a whole space race and everything else. What's the whole point of it? And this idea that I've been talking about before, in terms of bringing it all back towards the mystical, towards the spiritual, towards the same ancient pagan occult arenas that originally existed in Babylon. And that's the whole idea of bringing it back around full circle. But this is just amazing, because it shows how essentially the entire Russian space program, and even really all the other ones that preceded, actually all trace back to because in a pretty profound way, it really affirms, I think, what I've been concluding already, in terms of this relationship between, you know, a seemingly materialistic agenda and the deeper spiritual agenda behind it. And through this lens of Cosmism, you can completely see this relationship, because that's actually where it began. So I actually found this BBC documentary recently called Knocking on Heaven's Door, which just explores the entire topic of Russian Cosmism and the history of the main figures behind it, and then goes all the way through the Russian space program and Yuri Gagarin. And I'll leave the link below. It's a fascinating documentary, but I'm just going to show you some of some clips from it that I thought were most intriguing, and then I'll speak a little bit more on the other side of this. All right.
Он писал, как будет развиваться человечество, все, как станет более умный, более добрый, более счастливый. Вот в основном он про это писал и призывал всех расселяться в космосе, чтобы там жить более счастливо.
Федоров считал, что наука должна помочь воплотить Божий замысел о спасении человечества и его воскрешении. Христос говорил: то, что я сотворил, и вы сотворите, и больше того сотворите. А что творил Христос? Он воскрешал. То есть, если понять это буквально, то вот что нам Христос и завещал. Не ждать как мистического события воскрешения, а самим пойти навстречу Бога, исследовать проблему борьба со смертью, бессмертие, воскрешение. Космос – это только инструмент, это цветочки, это как бы мелочь. Существенно она поражает его пророческой состоятельностью.
In the optimistic aftermath of Gagarin's flight, building accelerated on a new town in the Siberian forest. It's called Akademgorodok. Artyom was taking me to Izrika, a research institute where the DNA of Tsiolkovsky and Fyodorov has survived everything.
Do you know much about Izrika itself?
I know what my mom's been doing.
What's that?
She's been trying to figure out ways of distant communicating between human mind and other cosmic consciousnesses in the universe.
Their theory is that objects give out information about themselves. They've placed one inside what they call the transmission zone. And there is the receiver.
Ориентироваться в этом еще.
Знаешь ли ты, где ты был, Антон, сегодня?
Да. Рассматриваю, как Луну держу, как глобус в руках, я рассматриваю ее, поворачиваю, могу рассмотреть, приблизить, отдалить. Такое вот ощущение.
Ты знал, что тебе предстоит? Какая задача сегодня?
Нет.
Антон, ты сегодня был вот по этому адресу. Вот эта фотография у нас была в зоне трансляции информации. Вы много раз сегодня ее увидите в работе, эту зону. Но в данном случае ты прав.
They call the chamber that Anton sat in a Kozyrov mirror, named after an astrophysicist who spent 11 years in the Gulag. Cut off from other scientists, he developed his own unorthodox theories. One was that all cosmic matter is ceaselessly communicating with itself. And what they believe here is that laser beams and anti-magnetic chambers like this help them tune into that information network. One of their heroes is Vladimir Vernadsky, a contemporary of Tsiolkovsky's, who said there was a third dimension of the cosmos, beyond things and living creatures, which he called the noosphere, or sphere of the mind. And that, say this branch of the cosmists, is where to find immortality. The man I needed to see was Alexander's partner, Vlail Kaznechev, the current guru of Cosmism. He He's now in his 80s and too frail to come to the laboratory. But he welcomed us into his house and began to explain how Cosmism had evolved.
В наших работах, особенно Владимира Ивановича Вернадского, было сказано в физике физическое время, а в интеллекте, в живом веществе другое понятие пространства и времени. В наших работах в Институте космической антропоэкологии пытаемся понять, как человеческий интеллект связан с полями космическими. Человек сам является колоссально научным, непознанным прибором. И он с этим интеллектом должен идти свободно.
Просто не логично. Отмычка не сработает, не скроешь это пространство. Нужно подготовить свое сердце, свою душу, научиться запечатлевать. И так было бы с чем туда входить. Заинтересовать пространство в себе, в своей личности. Это по Федорову формула, да? И тогда это получится.
Taisia, with years of practice and faith, had much better results. She showed me the record she kept of the images that had flooded into her head inside the mirror.
Задача-то здесь стоит в том, чтобы научиться с помощью какой-то, разработать метод или способы, которым человек бы научился управлять своим сознанием для того, чтобы это сознание могло двигаться в различном направлении, в том числе попытаться вступить вот как раз с космическим интеллектом, с космофизической средой.
I'm beginning to get the idea. We're talking close encounters here.
Кроме нас в космосе много интеллекта, это интеллектуальное пространство, это много пространств, мы частица, и это пространство интеллекта неизвестно, как нас примет или не примет.
And so essentially we can see that Cosmism is really just another packaging of the same New Age mysticism that we see in so many other places. And it just perfectly serves to highlight the relationship between the evolutionary dream of space travel and transhumanism. And if you actually go and do any of your own research on modern Cosmism, you in no time at all, you will see that it is virtually indistinguishable from transhumanism. And this makes perfect sense because really the whole undeniable conclusion reached by those who are super serious about space travel and conquering the universe and colonizing it is the realization that in our present human form, it's impossible. And even if you could achieve, light speed drives or warp drives and travel at the speed of light, or even succeed in uploading your consciousness into a software and beaming yourself as particles of light across the universe, you're still limited by the speed of light. And so traveling to other star systems, millions of light years away is still impossible. So what it implies is the necessity to transcend time and space altogether and to evolve, to spiritually evolve, to metaphysically evolve, which brings it right back around to the issue of higher dimensions and the noosphere being the highest dimension being that of pure consciousness. And yeah, you're right back into all the sacred sciences and the esoteric and the whole New Age message. Just once again, it just shows how these seemingly materialistic paradigms inevitably push people back around full circle to that ancient Babylonian mystical forbidden fruit of Satan's promise of immortality, of becoming God. And this is what so many people who are investigating transhumanism are concluding as well, in terms of it relating to the mark of the beast. It's like on a genetic level, connecting humanity to a spiritual dimension and the false promise of Godhood. So hopefully you found this as interesting as I did. Thank you.
election of a president, the playing of a World Series game, the havoc of an earthquake or the terror of a battle, just as though we were present. When the wireless transmission of power is made commercial, transport and transmission will be revolutionized. Already motion pictures have been transmitted by wireless over a short distance. Later the distance will be illimitable, and by later I mean only a few years hence. Pictures are transmitted over wires. They were telegraphed successfully